Um, okay, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. As we wait for everyone to get in, we wanted to let you know that this webinar will be recorded and we will email the recording after and it will be posted to our website. I will include the web address in the chat in a moment. Throughout the webinar, if you have questions, please insert them in the Q&A chat box. First and foremost, I'd like to thank Steve Hooper with TipHaus and Andrei Stern, owner of SuViche Hospitality Group, for being with us this afternoon. I'm going to start with first introducing Steve. Steve is the president of financial services of TipHaus and leads partnership and business development efforts. TipHaus is the only true industry expert specializing exclusively in tip management for restaurants, bars, and hospitality venues. We'd like to thank TipHaus for their growing partnership with FRLA, and again, we would like to thank Steve and Andrei for being here. I will yield it over to you to get started. Thank you, Steve.
Thanks, Nicolette. I appreciate that, and it's great to be here with you all today. And I've been spending a lot of time in the great state of Florida, working with the team at FRLA and so many great customers down there, like Andre and others, over the last year. So it's been a great partnership. So thank you for helping host this, and looking forward to many years of great partnership together. I'm Steve with TipHaus. I've been with the company a little over a year now. Before that, I was actually a restaurant operator myself. I was one of you guys. And I was running a restaurant group in Seattle. We had about 32 locations, and we had a lot of issues ourselves with tips. And I actually was a TipHaus customer first, before joining the team. So I have a little bit of knowledge of both sides of this equation. And I'm very excited to have Andre here. Andre was an early customer of TipHaus even before I was, and has used the platform in a variety of different ways that we're going to talk about today. I'll let him maybe give his background and talk about, Andre, what's your restaurant and hospitality journey been? Like, where did you start and how did you get to where you are today?
Thank you, Steve. Thank you, Nicolette, as well for the introduction. Yeah, so I've been in part of the hospitality industry for 15 years now. To be honest, I sort of just fell into it. My brother started the first SuViche back in 2010, and for some reason I decided to help him in his new endeavor, and I never left. That was back in 2011. So, I was lucky enough to work most positions in the restaurant and grow up, learning from the bottom up, if you will. And so 15 years later, we currently have 4 SuViche restaurants. So we're a multi-unit restaurant brand. Primarily, we have three brands. It's SuViche, Novecento, and Omakai. Right now, we're about 14 restaurants, and we have a commissary kitchen. And so, yeah, it's a little bit about sort of the last 15 years.
It's a very classic restaurant journey on some level, right? You come in and you're doing the one, and you just kind of keep going. Once it's in your blood, it's hard to get away from it. It's a great industry that way, where you can build a life and a career.
Right.
So, obviously tips have been a part of American culture forever. And they've gotten harder to manage over the years. How did you deal with tips before finding TipHaus, and what were you guys doing to sort of, manage that side of the business?
So we've been using some sort of software technology to help us with tip distribution for quite a while. I would think, as far as I can remember, I think almost 10 years. At the very beginning, we didn't use the tip pools because our restaurants were very small. So we had essentially our first restaurant was 500 square feet. So you can imagine, I mean, we essentially had 2 servers running the floor, and we were there most of the time as well. Our second restaurant in 2012 was similar, 1,300 square feet. We thought that was sort of going to be the prototype for the brand. So still a very small operation, 3 servers, no real support staff. But then when we moved into SuViche Wynwood, which is a little bit of a bigger space, 2,500 square feet, there's the bar component, which sort of added complexities for front of house team. And also then we started, obviously, bartender, servers. It was a little bit of a bigger footprint, so we also had bussers to help with service. And then at that time, we were working with Gratcher, which is another platform that we used to work with until we found you guys. So we've always really been very how would you say lucky, I
Technology
guess,
forward.
to use
Technology
technology
forward.
because
Yeah.
but there is actually when we took up SuViche, we started the brand Novecento. We took over the brand in 2017, so we sort of had to implement all of our processes. At the time, they were actually using Excel, so the old traditional Excel, where the manager on duty at the end of the night puts in the tips, the hours, and the distribution sort of happens, and then you have to take all of that information and bundle it together and get it ready for payroll. So, and then obviously I mean, there's so many areas where mistakes can happen, human error. So we try. That was one of the first things we try to get away from when we took over the brand, because not only was it time consuming, but also a big liability, right?
Yeah.
Thinking that we could at the end of the day, it's money is obviously very important, and for people it's very important, and you don't want to ever make a mistake with that. So we tried to streamline it right away, and I think at that time I think it was at that time that we started with you guys, 2017, 2018.
Yeah, no, you were one of the very early adopters of the TipHaus platform. So as you think of, like you mentioned, like the different models and different size locations that you have and whatnot. Um, as you've structured kind of the tip pools during those eras and with the different businesses, what were some of the ways you were like doing the pools in terms of sharing, and what was the thinking behind the structure of those from a team dynamic perspective?
Sure. So we've always been of the idea that less is more. Our rules are very, very straightforward. We don't want to overcomplicate them, because it's sort of like once you open a can of worm, you can really make it 1,000 different ways and get very sort of specific. But we've decided to just be very, very transparent and simple in our rules. It's just easier for training purposes, for our team to understand. So, our rules are sort of very simple. It's essentially, we distribute to the support team at time of sale. The percentages don't change whether, day parts, they don't change whether it's a weekend. And then that way it's very easy to explain for team. It's very easy to understand for the team. So we've had very little issues in that regard. And so we've always just tried to keep them very simple.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, understanding what you're making is important. And to that end, do your team members utilize the app that shows tipping and all that? Are they able to see their daily earnings on the tip side?
Yeah, they use it all the time. I think it's one of their favorite perks about us being with TipHaus is the ability for them to in almost real time, be able to see how much money they're taking home, and also see who they're distributing to, who's contributing to them, to their pool, if they're in a pool. So it's transparency. You can't get more transparent than that. No, it's not somebody going to a worksheet and hoping that by the end of the pay period it's correct, and them having to have saved their cheat sheets and make sure and compare at the end of 2 weeks. So right now it's essentially it's very transparent. The team loves it. Number one, and number two, I think it also, they sometimes let us know if maybe there was an issue where it didn't sync correctly or something. So they're actually troubleshooting for us way before payroll. So that also helps us avoid mistakes during payroll. No, so it's sort of a win-win for everybody.
Oh, that's really interesting. I actually hadn't heard that before, but that's a really good kind of second effect of the employees having that kind of access. Is like, hey, something doesn't look quite right. Being able to shoot it together. Interesting.
Yeah, and at times it was I don't know, like a server clocked in as a bartender, for example, for their
Yep.
shift. And then it's like, wait a second, why did I, why am I part of a pool all of a sudden? And it's like, well, you used the wrong job code. So then we go back, fix it, and it gets fixed. But if we didn't have that transparency or that tool, it would sort of be an after payroll issue, and that's always more complicated, because then at that time you've already paid the tips out to all of your team members, so you have to deduct, and you have to add and explain, and so it's that's, you want to avoid that at all costs.
Absolutely. And those things happen, right? People forget to clock out or they clock into the wrong job code, right? That's a pretty, you know, that was one of the banes of my existence every morning. And the report I would get is who didn't clock out. It's like, come on.
Yeah, exactly.
Um, so you guys made a pretty significant transition this year in terms of your business model, in terms of both the tradition moving from traditional tipping to implementing service charges, and then on the heels of that, shifting over to a commissions model. Would love to sort of understand, what was behind making those adjustments? What were you guys thinking about, and what were you trying to accomplish with those changes? And then, secondarily, how's it going?
Sure. So, so just to provide a little bit of context of what's going on in the state of Florida, back, I think it was 2 or 3 years ago, the legislation passed to increase minimum wage, and while freezing the tip credit. So the tip credit didn't change. The tip credit here in Florida is $3.02. So at the time that the legislation went live, we were paying, I think it was $8.63 minimum wage, and tip minimum wage was $5.61, something like that. When legislation passed, essentially over a 5-year period, that $5.63 tip minimum wage was going to go up to $12.98. So it's a 150% increase. Sorry, it's way more than 200. It's almost 200, more than 200% increase. So that was sort of like the first flag of, okay, well, something will need to change. At the time, the first couple of years, we absorbed the increment. We just felt that the market wasn't ready, because for us to be able to switch to a commission model, the first step in doing that is the service charge, where we need to start including service charge on all dine-in checks. So we just felt that it was sort of like we didn't want to be first, but we also didn't want to be last. And our restaurants, for perspective, we're not high-end restaurants. We're full service restaurants, but we're casual service. So SuViche brand average ticket is, or average check is, average guest is $28.
Okay.
Novecento is $40. So, we didn't want to, we were aware that our guests might be a little bit more price sensitive. So we were a little apprehensive at first about including the service charge. So it took us about a couple of years to marinate the idea, see, okay, when are we going to do it? How are we going to do it? And then at the beginning of, actually late last year, we made the decision that 2024 was the year that we were going to make the switch. Because in September, which just passed, I think right now minimum wage is $9.98 tip minimum wage. So you can imagine already $3 times the thousands and thousands of hours of front of house team that we use. It's money that, with everything that has happened since the pandemic and all the margins, how the margins of the industry have suffered, it's just something that as an industry and as restaurant owners, we couldn't honestly afford. So the main driver was that. How can we mitigate that increase in minimum wage increase? So then we had heard about the commission model. Obviously, in the West Coast is sort of been happening for a long time, in Washington especially. So then we decided, you know what, let's do it. So the first thing we wanted to test was the service charge. So which is the first thing we started to do even before implementing the commission. We said, let's test service charge. Let's see our guests' reaction. So we did that, and we sort of started with the Novecento brand, because we felt that if we were going to test a brand, this would be the brand where we would have the least negative impact on our guests. So we went live with it a bit in May, I believe it was. We had 6 weeks of service charge. We had very little complaint. Maybe, we're serving 5,000 people a week, 5 to 10,000 people a week. And maybe we had a handful of complaints, So obviously they're noise. It's not good. It's not, we don't want to hear a daily complaint, but not enough for us to move the needle or change our decision. So once we checked that service charge didn't have a negative impact, then we rolled the commission model out to the team.
Great.
And we then moved to the different brands, and we finished essentially the rollout. We just finished it not too long ago at the end of August.
So as you were transitioning, there's obviously the guest sentiment side that you spoke to on the service charge and sort of what's happening there. What about the team side? How did the team react, and what did you do to sort of bring them along the journey?
Yeah, so we were very. It was a big concern of ours, obviously. There are a few things that you change that the team are very sensitive to, and one of them is, when you're talking about money and how much they're taking and making. So we tried to make we did our homework. Essentially, we tried to build models where we would at least try to forecast the change and see how it would affect the team, and that's how we landed on the numbers that we did. But at the very core, we wanted our promise to the team that they were going to be the same or better. So we were trying to find ways, or actually we found ways for us to get there. So number one, we're distributing the entire service charge to the team. We as the restaurant's not keeping anything. And we're also incentivizing the team from the additional tip, or I shouldn't call it additional tip, just the tip.
Yeah, just a little bit of
yeah. Technically, it's not additional; it's the tip, right? The other part is the service charge. We actually had originally we thought that only about we were only going to get about maybe 1 to 2% of tip, but what we're seeing is we're closer to 4 or 5%.
Oh, wow.
So before our average tip, we were at about 17.5.
Okay.
And right now we're at about 22%. So that increase that we've seen in service charge and tip, it's essentially the difference in the hourly wage that they're making. So at the very least, we've seen our team to be the same or better in regards to hourly total compensation per hour than before the transition. So we were very happy and excited to confirm that after the fact.
Yeah.
And I think it's evident by the fact that we only lost about 5% of our front of the house service team during the transition.
Wow.
So out of 300 team members, I think we only lost like 15.
Wow, that's impressive. Yeah, because I mean it's a big change, right? In the way you think about the way you get compensated, and I have to imagine you were pretty. It sounds like you did a lot of math, which turned out was mostly correct, if not even undershot in the mark a little bit, potentially. But it sounds like you probably also had a lot of communication with the team about this along the way. What did the communication strategy look like on that side?
Yeah. So with anything, we try to be as transparent as possible. We felt that the education piece was going to be a big part because a lot of people are not familiar with the commission model. So we felt that educating the team and showing them what it is, how it works, the legalities of it as well. Talking about sort of the good things and everything essentially. So what we did is we essentially created a very nice sort of PowerPoint that explained point by point everything we were doing. We had a nice agenda, and then we went to every store in person, had a full front of house meeting, and explained it to them and said, this is what we're trying to do. This is why we're trying to do it. We've been here for 15 years. We want to be here for the next 15 years. Unfortunately, this is one of the things we need to do in order for us to get there. But rest assured that our promise to you is that you're going to be the same or better than before. And I think we've delivered on that promise. And I think that us being there with them and sort of hand-holding them through the process, and bringing also experts in the area, in the experts that have done this with other restaurants that also helped us, and this is how other restaurants are also doing it, and these are the legalities, and this is something that has been sort of been done for many years. It's not like we're not doing something new here. So that really helped, I think, in the transition. No, we're making sure that we were explaining things as clear and as transparent as possible, and that everybody, we talked to every single person. It was mandatory that they had to talk to us if they didn't come to the meeting, because we just wanted to make sure that they understood the why, not just, hey, this is happening, and thanks.
Yep, that's great.
You start tomorrow, come to your shift tomorrow, and this is the new sort of pay method. No, we want to make sure, and then we gave them a couple of weeks sort of to marinate on that, and then we went live.
Yep, makes sense. Yeah, just flipping a switch without telling people would cause quite a bit of chaos.
Yeah. No, we took our time. That's why we started the process April and we finished in August.
Yeah.
Because one brand, then restaurants, and we just didn't go do everything at the same time.
That's smart. In terms of like the way you've structured things, obviously you were using us with the tipping and the pooling and other things previously. Were you able to continue utilizing TipHaus through the transition, and how did it kind of help facilitate the transition to the commission model?
Yep. Yeah. It's essentially, I mean, that was the beauty of it, that we didn't have to change much. We just had to tweak a little bit the distribution rules, so that we could account for service charge separately than the tips, because we do have two different distributions for those two, for service charge and tips. We have different distributions. So we just had to, I mean, honestly, it was very quickly for us to make those changes, because on the service charge side, the servers distribute a little bit more to support, and on the tip side, they keep more than 90% in order to incentivize. Essentially, it's whatever they make on top of the service charge, it's them, with the exception of maybe the busser or the runner that might be supporting them.
Yep.
So it was very easy, very transparent. The team was happy that it wasn't an additional change, because that would have been terrible if we had to just, this is changing, and by the way, this is changing too. So
yeah.
The less changes, the better.
That makes sense. And I mean, sounds like all the work went into the planning, the pre-planning, the getting the POS set up to do service charge, the tip line right, the language on your receipts, like all of those things, and then all the communication. Like that's the work. Changing a few settings in TipHaus was actually a pretty easy,
thing. And you can schedule them, so it was quite easy.
Worked out pretty well. Good. Well, I'm glad those scheduling and other features that we've built in over the years came in handy along the way. So I guess, having gone through this whole process now and transitioned to this kind of new model, which you're right, some friends of mine in Seattle were early adopters of this model back in, I think more than 10 years ago at this point, that they adopted a commission model. We are seeing at TipHaus more folks expressing interest in this than we've ever seen. Folks are really, curious. How's it working? How's it going? What does it mean for the team? What does it mean for the bottom line? And can this be, with the minimum wage dynamics that are nationwide at this point, something that actually helps independent restaurant groups like yours and formerly mine survive? And so would love kind of to hear some of your lessons learned about this transition, and kind of what it's meant for the business now that you're on the other side of it.
Yeah. I mean, I think, we've had a very positive experience, both from the perspective of the savings that it has brought the company, as well as how the team feels, which I think, you can't have one without the other. So, if we had improved sort of performance but decreased morale, at some point it would have caught up. So, I think the two need to go hand in hand, and that's what we continue to measure to make sure that the team is happy, and that the team is making good money at the end of the day. That's what's important too. Um, we we did feel that it was something we had to do, and I think a lot of people, that's why it's becoming more and more popular, because we've sort of tried to go through our entire P&L and say, okay, how can we affect this area, and how can we affect this area, and how can we affect this area? And we've sort of gone back and forth, and it comes a time where you just have to make these types of decisions if you want to continue to be sort of in the restaurant industry, and I think a lot of people will attest to the fact that it hasn't been easy the last 3-4 years. And yes, there's been positives after the pandemic, and I think top line wise, it's been good. But there's material impacts too that we've seen from a food cost perspective, from in Florida insurance. Still, we've seen at least 50% increase in hourly wage across the kitchen, while our ticket average has only maybe gone up 12-13%. So when you put things in perspective, these are the sort of decisions that have a big impact, and I think allows us to continue to work on additional growth, which at the end of the day is good for everyone, so that we can continue to give our team opportunities to grow and career paths for them to continue and improve their lives. So, in general, those are the two things we were looking for, and luckily we've been able to achieve them. I know that the commission is dependent on the service charge, and so there are concepts or that might not be key to it.
Yep.
QSR concepts, perhaps, that need another solution.
Yep.
But at the same time, I know in the Northeast they don't do commission, but they do like a benefit fee, or the restaurants call it differently, where there's like a 3 to 5% fee on,
like a surcharge kind of thing.
Yeah, it's exactly. But then there's issues now with certain states banning junk fees. I know Minnesota is one of them. Yeah. So we're just trying to survive. And I think it's at times it's state specific, it's city specific. Here in Miami, a lot more restaurants now are doing service charge, so it's normal. It's become sort of normalized to a certain extent, correct? Yeah. But there might be cities where like nobody does it, right? So then it's like, oh, like, well, that's not the solution then. I think it's very state and then city specific.
Yep. No, like there's sort of a ecosystem dynamic. You kind of need a few folks to do it together. To your point, like being first is hard. If you're the first one in a region to jump into service charge, you're really putting yourself out there in a really challenging way for sure. We've got a question in the chat actually. What percentage are you doing for service charge in your restaurants?
We do 18%.
Okay.
We tried to do for the SuViche brand, we wanted to be at 16%.
Yep.
But the numbers didn't allow us to. We wouldn't be able to essentially our servers would have suffered, and they would have taken a big hit. So we had to go to 18%. And that's sort of from the models that we ran, that was sort of like the least we could charge. There's restaurants in Miami charging 20%. So again, we go back to sort of the area where you are, what type of restaurant you're in, or sector you're in. But for us, we're charging currently 18%.
So that's across the concepts.
Across the concepts.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. Actually, there's one concept within Omakai, hand roll bar, where we charge 20%.
Okay. Is that a little higher end than the others?
Yeah, the concept's just a little bit different, and it's a hand roll bar. So there's only a couple of servers, and the average ticket is like $30, but it's $35, but it's like a very high quality hand roll bar. So yeah, we just decided to charge 20%, and it's been fine. It's been good for the team too.
Great. So in terms of the workflow now as it relates to like payroll and things like that, has anything really changed as you've transitioned to this model, or is it all pretty much look the same from the team perspective?
For all intents and purposes, it's the same. There are some technical differences where the service charge that you collect and pay out, you pay out as commission, right? And then the tip that you collect and pay out is paid as traditional tip, like we're used to.
Yep.
So essentially, you're using two earnings code. One is commission and the other is tips. And because that's the way that we need to differentiate it, because how it works, essentially, every 4 weeks, we run a test on all our team members that receive commission and make sure that 50% or more of their wages are coming from commission. Because if not, you fail the 7I exemption and you have to, it triggers other sort of things you need to do.
That's interesting. So it has to be majority commission. If for some reason tips got really big, that would become a problem.
Yeah. Or also so there are certain positions, and that's why also there's certain positions like a host, for example, where they so just to backtrack a little bit, but 7I it's technically an overtime exemption. So that in the 7I, if you're under the 7I commission model, you're exempt from paying overtime as long as you meet the requirements, which is 50% of their wages needs to come from commission. Obviously, you need to meet federal and state minimum wage and overtime wage and all of that. But so, for example, our hosts, that we pay them a higher hourly wage, they usually don't make or fail that threshold.
Yeah.
And so, for example, they can't work overtime because it would be very expensive. Because then the overtime rate is like it's based on their average hourly rate. It just becomes a little bit technical, but
no,
essentially, yeah.
So there's complexity in this model that need to account for in terms of like ongoing accounting and other filings you need to do and things like that. It sounds like
A little bit, yeah. And actually, the other benefit too that maybe we haven't discussed is that because it is an overtime exemption rule, we've found that, instead of servers needing to have two jobs, like a full-time and a part-time, because maybe they want to work 55 hours a week, we're able to offer that now. They make, a lot more money, obviously, because they're working more hours, but they only have one job. No, so it's not that they need to, maybe they can do a double instead of having to work here in the morning and having to go to another restaurant to work dinner shift and, learning another menu. And it's sort of like we see it as a benefit, honestly, because, I would much rather just have one job and work 52 hours, 55 hours in that job and same menu, same people. If, it's a good place to be at. I would much rather have that than having two jobs and getting to my second job and driving to my second job. So that's sort of like an added benefit that we've seen. And over time, what we're thinking or what we're hoping for, what that will happen is that we'll essentially need less number of servers. So let's say if today we have 20 servers to serve for a restaurant because they were only used to working 35, 38 hours. If we can somehow push servers to work 45, 48 hours because they want to, not because, right? Not because we need them to, then we cut down to maybe 15 people, which then cuts down on training, less people to manage, less people to, right? So that's sort of our long-term hypothesis of what will happen. We're too early in the game to know whether that will happen, but that's how we're also pitching it, in the sense of like, hey, like you want to work more, go ahead. Because a lot of before the restriction was like, I can't give you more hours because you will trigger overtime, and now it's like you want more hours here, here you go.
That's like an amazing mental flip. Like I just think like we managed overtime so closely, like it was you just tripping into it like blows up your economics so heavily. to move to a model where it's like, look, if you want to make more money, work more shifts. And we don't care how many that you do. And I mean, don't be too tired to come into work, but like,
Right.
like
Yeah,
that,
yeah,
like
yeah.
it's almost like it's almost breaking my brain a little bit trying to think about flipping to that mentality of work all you want.
Right. No, it's a great benefit, to be honest.
So have
So
employees started taking advantage of that
we
already?
have, yeah, we have some people that, are working 45, 46 hours. Maybe they do a double once a week or something like that, and they Friday or Saturday, and they'll be there all day and make a little bit more money.
Yeah,
So
that's great. I mean, that's one of the benefits of the service industry on some level too, is, in
mhm,
theory, you can always find work, but usually to your point, meant you had to find work in multiple places
right.
to do that. But that's great. I can imagine, like you, I think your hypothesis is correct as well. I think more people will take advantage of this, but
Right.
just take time.
Hopefully over time, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Um, um, in terms of, there's an explanation process when it comes to the transition from tips to service charges. Um, ha- was there a specific language that you had the team use as you were making that flip with guests, like particularly regulars, right? Those are the ones that are most likely to uh, have an issue.
Right.
But like, was there a specific
Yeah.
way you guys talked about it?
Yeah. So at the very beginning, we sort of obviously there's the communication that needs to happen from a legal perspective, signs you need to have, the disclaimer you need to have in the menu, and so on and so forth. But from a hospitality perspective, sort of our stance was, if you come in, you've been coming here for lunch once a week. You come in and then you see this when you're paying the bill, and you're like, whoa, what is this? So we were for the first time, a guest would sort of say, hey, like I've been coming here for years, and this is the first time I see this. It's like, okay, like this time we'll remove it, but just know that if and when you come back, we're unable to remove it. So we try to be on the guest side from that perspective,
Okay.
but at the same time, you need to change the mentality that the service charge
It's
is not
optional. Yeah.
optional.
Yeah.
It's kind of like me selling you an additional menu item, right? It's essentially the same thing.
Yep.
So we technically never comp, or we never remove service charge. If we need to fix it, we'll comp it for the equivalent amount, but we'll do a dollar
It
comp
always
or
showed up on
something,
the receipt at the end.
but it has to show up. Yeah, yeah. And
Yeah.
but yeah, I think it's just sort of the change in mentality that the service charge is not optional. And it's essentially like selling you another entree. That's the real, that's really what's happening. So just that switch.
Yep.
But like I said, we've been sort of lucky in that sense that we've had very, very little negative complaints from our guests, including in SuViche, where we thought that we might have a lot because I mean it's $20 a person. You would think that nobody would be willing to pay that service charge, but we've had no issues there, and across the board, across our locations. Even if even in our 500 square foot restaurant where there's 6 tables and they're all outside, like it hasn't been an issue. So
Interesting.
we're happy, yeah.
It does, I guess, make me think a little bit that, like all the delivery platforms now, right? DoorDash and Uber Eats and all that, you're paying a delivery fee. You're paying for the service component of getting the food to you. On some level, that's no different in a restaurant now. You're paying for the hospitality that's being
Right.
provided in that environment, just in a different way, right? Like,
Yeah.
it used to
Yeah.
be tips. Now we're calling it a service charge.
Right.
That's an
Yeah.
interesting mental model to kind of think about that additional menu item thought.
Yeah,
Uh,
and I think the clearest message to our guests too was that this was 100% money that was being sent to the team. Like
yep.
this wasn't a way for us to sort of yeah, we're charging you 18% and we're keeping it all, or we're keeping 3, 4, 5%. No, I think the communication from the very beginning, and we were very sort of strict with this, especially with our team, that, if a guest asks, you tell them the truth. And the truth is the entire 18% is going to the service team, right? We had 1 or 2 issues where the guest would say, would actually told guests like, no, they're keeping the 18%.
Oh, geez.
So, we have to be very strict with those people. But at the end of the day, it's the transparency with both the team and the guest, where, we're not touching that 18%, nor are we touching the tip left on top of the service charge.
Yep. No, that's wow. That would be a less fun coaching conversation to have.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, we thought it would be definitely more frictional if we said, yeah, we're charging 18%, but we're keeping 2. We didn't want to go that route.
Yep, that makes sense. So, obviously minimum wage is continuing to increase, Florida and honestly everywhere. You've kind of found a model that you are having success with. What advice would you give other operators that are also looking at their P&Ls, and labor is one of the 2 top cost items. So
Yeah.
What advice would you give them as they're kind of thinking through the alternatives and trying to figure out how to keep themselves afloat?
Sure. So a couple of things. I think this minimum wage increase that we faced since legislation passed, the truth of the matter is that it was an increase on tip minimum wage, right? Because minimum wage went up from, I think, 9 to 15, which, yes, it's a lot, but realistically, it's still not at 15. By the way, it's currently at 13. Realistically, nobody in our kitchens is making less than $15, right? So this
didn't affect your
minimum
back
wage
of house,
increase,
basically.
it had very little. It wasn't because of the minimum wage increase that wages went up in the kitchen, in the heart of the house, or in the back of the house.
Yeah.
It was due to other factors, inflation and the pandemic and the short labor supply.
Yeah.
But this increase was really an increase on tip minimum wage, from us paying under $6 an hour to paying $13 an hour. So you're talking about 200% increase, where if that line item used to be, if you're a full service restaurant, probably not less than 5%. So 5 to 8%, you're then talking about going 10 to 16%, right?
I like
So
that math break.
You can't be profitable with a 15% front of the house labor. No. So it was essentially, how do we fix that? The back of the house labor, there's other ways to attack that. It wasn't through this commission model. Heart of the house labor is sort of what we're going through now, brand by brand, which is essentially what we call a menu party, which we're looking at everything and everything from recipes, line builds, execution, yields, waste. How long does it take to cut this? How long does it take to execute this, item by item? And from there, making decisions about what's driving my labor hours, where are my bottlenecks, are my kitchens laid out efficiently? That it's sort of like a different process, where we're actually cutting down 25% of our menu. We're trying to be leaner, more efficient. Why are our guests really coming to us? And let's give them that experience. Let's focus on the 80% that's moving, rather the 20% that's moving the 80% of the needle. And how can we double down on that? So that exercise is in parallel. Beginning of the year, we tried to solve, front of the house with the commission, and now the second part of the year, we've been focusing on this so-called menu party, which will release before the year end, which essentially we're just looking at ways where we can pay more as employers, but use less hours, to execute our concepts.
Got it. Yep. So you're doing some, I guess, for lack of a better word, sort of a little bit of menu rationalization, focusing on items that are, higher volume and removing things that don't necessarily move the needle, but maybe add a lot of SKUs to your orders and things like that. That makes a lot of
Yeah,
sense.
exactly.
Okay, that's good. So a few different, it sounds like I mean, as with anything in a restaurant, you got to throw everything at it when you're attacking a problem that looks like this. So I can
Right.
appreciate all of that. Well, that was kind of my list of questions, and we got a few good ones from the room as well. But Andre, I really, genuinely appreciate your joining us today and having the opportunity to kind of talk through all of this with you, because you're, like you said, you didn't do it on the bleeding edge of moving to service charge and commissions, but you are leading the pack, and you've done it across a range of brands that I think a lot of folks were, I've spoken with in other parts of the country. They're like, will it work for my $20 check average, $35 check average, casual service
Yeah.
environment? And you're in the process of proving that out right now. So this has been a great conversation. I really appreciate your time. And I think I'm trying to share something on my screen. But really appreciate you joining us today. And I know other operators are gonna get a lot of value from this conversation as we roll it out to others.
Yes, definitely. Thank you for having me. Pleasure to share our story. And yeah, happy, happy. Hopefully somebody got some good advice or at least one good thing from this conversation.
Great. Thank you very much. Nicolette, I'll turn it back to you.
Awesome. Thank you, Steve, and Andre. Yeah, we just want to thank both of you guys for taking time out of your day and your busy schedules to be here with us. It was a great conversation, and just really, really enjoyed having you both with us today. I also wanted to just remind everyone that the webinar will be recorded and posted on our website and will be emailed out. I'm also going to post the link to where you can go to our webinars in case anybody wants to save it. But it should be out to attendees and posted by the end of today. With that being said, I think that we are done. So I just want to wish everybody a great rest of your day, and thank you again for being here with us.
Thanks, Nicolette. Thanks, Andre.